Welcome to the Front End Nerdery podcast, a podcast about front end development and design. I'm your host, Todd Libby. My guest today is software engineer, teacher, and you can catch him on Twitch, and tabletop RPG fanatic, from what I understand, Ben Myers. Ben, how are you doing today?
Howdy, Todd. I'm doing great. Just to preempt any questions out there from the audience, if you're ever curious how many tabletop role-playing games is too many for one person at one time, the answer is in fact 4, maybe fewer. Maybe just one game is enough. But I'm currently in 4 games, and it's a bit much.
Yeah, yeah. I used to play a lot, and if I remember correctly, I had about 3 or 4 going at one time too. So yeah, it can be pretty busy.
Mhm.
So getting into, would you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, howdy. So I'm Ben. I've been in the industry for about 3.5 years now, the front end industry, that is. Um, and I'm currently a software engineer at Microsoft. I'm working on the developer documentation platform. And if you've seen me around already, it's because I am a huge proponent of web accessibility. And I love putting resources out into the world around that. My current big thing is I do a weekly Twitch show called Some Antics. Todd, you were actually my second ever guest on that show a year ago,
Yes.
coming up on the 1 year anniversary of the show.
Hmm.
But every week I bring on guests from around the web development industry to teach me something about building great user experiences in a hands-on way, typically with a focus on accessibility and core web technologies. Can you tell I've rehearsed that pitch quite a bit? Um, but yeah, it's a delightful show. You can find it at twitch.tv/some antics dev. I'll be sure to make sure that Todd has that in the show notes. But that's kind of the big thing I do. I also blog and like about accessibility. That tends to be a lot less frequent. But yeah, so that's who I am and kind of how folks might have seen me around already.
Nice. Excellent. So let's hop right into the questions here. My first question that I ask all my guests is, how did you get started in your web development journey?
Oh goodness. So Todd, I I am the ripe old age of 25. Ripe. Truly,
Yes.
truly I am in my ripeness. But what this means is when I grew up was when home computers were first starting to be a thing, like just on that precipice there. My dad actually he uh when he was working on his doctorate thesis, he was also kind of my babysitter in those moments, and the way he would keep me entertained was by giving me like spare keyboards and stuff like that that I could just slam my hands into and pretend I was typing. So I was indoctrinated into the computer world from a very early age, and I don't know. I I think sometimes it's a lot easier to see the trajectory of your life in retrospect than it is when you're going through it. Because I built my first website back in like 4th or 5th grade. I did not have my parents' permission. I did not ask. And uh, yeah, it was just I found like a website builder online, put a really kooky, cheesy homepage up there, which thankfully the internet has scrubbed from existence because I don't know if I want people finding what 4th grade Ben thought was funny.
Right.
Um, and and yet, I got to college and I was completely undecided. I had such analysis paralysis around just what am I going to do? What career do I want? Um, Despite the fact that like you look biographically and every single signal is pointing me towards like doing something with computers or doing something in like like disability advocacy space and stuff like that. um, I was undecided. I eventually tried my hand at computer science as a degree, realized I was probably going to be the best fit for me, got my degree in that. Um, and then I interned with USAA, the insurance and banking provider. I was over on the banking side. And honestly, the fact that I ended up in web development was mostly at the whim of my manager at that point. I was like, you know what? I feel like I have such a wide potential ahead of me. I don't know what aspects of, software development there even are, let alone um, what I would want to do. And she was like, we're going to try you in web development. And lo and behold, that ended up just being an absolute passion. So that is, I think, the roundabout path that, like, looking back, it's like incredibly obvious that I would end up here, but going through it, not nearly so obvious.
Yeah, I think that happens to a lot of people. That makes me think back to when I got started. I got started many, many moons ago. We'll leave it at that. I'm long in the tooth.
You are the ripe old age of 26, I
Yeah,
understand.
absolutely. Absolutely. I turned 26 pretty soon for the 27th time, I think, right around there. Anyways, um, I started on a Commodore 64, just typing in, programming in BASIC. I learned BASIC at an early age. My parents didn't know what I was doing either, so yeah, that's a great origin story. So let's talk accessibility, because that's why I
Yeah.
have you here. Um, what are we seeing these days as far as you're concerned, um, with accessibility and issues that you come across a lot?
That is an interesting question. I think we are still very much so figuring out how to handle dynamic web applications accessibly. I I think we found through user testing and through just a lot of like practice and teaching as the accessibility and web dev community. I think we have landed on some best practices, but dynamic web applications feels to me like still kind of an unsolved space there. That seems to be kind of a big one. The other thing is, I think, um, keeping pace with change. So I'm so new to the. I realize I interrupted my own thought there, but like I am so new to the web dev space that like HTML5 is all I've known, right? And
Right.
HTML5 is very stable, right? And folks are continuing to expand upon that, but it's still a very stable spec. And nevertheless, the expansion is still something that we need to keep up with. And I think that mostly comes from not all of HTML5 was like directly, totally 100% supported in browsers immediately. Now browsers are adding more and more support for some of those specs and those elements. Assistive technology is getting better. And what that means is that the best patterns, even 5 years ago, aren't necessarily the same, right? And so, how do we communicate not just in this unsolved space of dynamic web applications, but in this still mutating kind of conglomerate of an experience that the web is. The web is a blob that is trudging forward, trudging at light speed, it seems, but just
Yep.
keeping pace with that and figuring out how do we continually update our guidance so that the stuff that was true 5 years ago can be supplanted by the stuff that is true now.
Yeah, definitely agree with you there. So I know you write a lot about, and you on your Twitch stream, on your Twitch channel, you talk about it a lot, and that's semantics,
Yes,
and semantic HTML. Um, One of your articles, the definition list or the description list
it's a description
article,
now. Yep.
yeah, um, that was I passed that along to a few people as a reference, and they found it very useful. I find it very useful as a, just so I can go back and go, oh, I need to, I've run into a couple situations, let's say, that I've gone back and I've said, okay, I know Ben's articles out there. When I compare what I'm looking at to,
Mhm.
can I use this in your article to use in what I'm looking at. And, a couple times I've had to. So I want to thank you for that, for writing
Thank
that,
you.
first of all. And second of all, very handy. I will also put that link into the show notes. My question is, what is the inspiration behind some of the stuff that you either you want to do on your Twitch channel,
Yeah.
or write that regarding semantic HTML?
So, first of all, thank you so much for the kind words about the DL post. That is maybe my favorite thing I've ever written, and I was blown away by just how many people took a lot away from that post, right? And that post actually represents, in some ways, some of the things I was just talking about with how things are still changing. Because one of the things I just casually mentioned in there is like, oh, you can wrap uh, DT and DD tags in divs now. Which is very new. That is like relative to, I want to say like 2018 was when that guidance was like first kind of like updated, that you could do that. Um, so that is very reasonable for web developers to have learned old truths about description lists that are now out of date, and that like this updated guidance can make their lives so much easier. Um, I think in general, we can benefit a lot from, there's kind of mantra that you see on like Twitter and stuff, which is quote, using the platform. And it's something that I agree a lot with. I think that um, browser developers are really, really good at their job. They're really good at having put forth baseline default, like accessible experiences, usable experiences. And we would save our developers a lot of time and energy. We would save a whole lot of code that we don't need to send over if we would just leverage the platform more, leverage that consistency so that folks have experiences across the same pages. So the core web technologies, I think, are something that it feels basic. It feels to me like this should be 101 material, but it isn't, right?
Yeah.
Folks are taught the fundamental syntax of HTML and CSS, but maybe not these days equipped with the skills to use use those tags and those styles deftly.
Yeah.
And certainly not in any way that allows them to refresh their guidance and figure out like what has changed since they first learned things. So I really love semantics as a foundation, not just because semantics will, for the most part, provide a default accessible experience, but also because it feels like it's something that we still have to learn. We as an industry still have to, just dive deep on. Um, and that is something that I really like diving into. I think it's a bit of a fun technical problem. And I'd love to tell a quick story, which is, I guess, continuing my origin story here, which is when I first came to web development, my first job was actually as a React developer. And when like and my job to train me in this paid for me to take a well-known popular video course. I'm not going to name the course because this isn't about pointing fingers.
Right.
I think this is emblematic of a bigger experience I've had, which is yeah, I took this course, learned React with it, started applying what I had learned in the course into the work that I was doing. A year later, I had the opportunity to revisit that course as I started to volunteer with our company's onboarding process for college hires and people who had just changed careers into web development. So folks who did not know web development, my job was for 12 weeks to be one of the people that mentored them in web development best practices. And I realized in that year that a lot of things I had just taken for granted from this course were blisteringly wrong. The one that I point to as the emblematic example there is that the course instructor consistently recommended clickable divs, like adding click handlers to divs. And, in the year since I had first taken that course, I had learned that, like, obviously, there's almost never a case to do that, right? There's almost never a reason to attach a click handler to a div, because usually what you want is a button that has so much experience for you out of the box. And so that, like, out of spite, I wrote the first technical blog post I had written, which I called how parentheses not to build a button. So how not to build a button. And I went through the same steps, but like, how would you take a clickable div and like MacGyver it into a button, and then being like, okay, but the button tag is still far easier than all of this. I just, I think that a lot of times in the industry, we take for granted just how influenced newcomers and beginners can be by, you know, the first tutorials they take. And those tutorials likely are not going to be explicitly web accessibility tutorials, right? They almost definitely aren't. They're usually introduction to React, but those folks don't have the context to know any better. They don't have enough information to be able to approach the course critically. And so that means that they're likely to interpret just about anything the instructor does as more or less an industry standard. And that includes things like clickable divs. And so what's really inspired me to do kind of the accessibility advocacy and education work I do is I want to put forth into the world, A, that accessibility is important, B, that it's actually fairly approachable, right? Like that you can start incorporating this stuff and showing like live demos as to like how this meaningfully changes the experience for disabled users, to kind of combat the sense that you know, it's maybe a tack on thing, or that you don't need to worry about it, or that it's hard. That really gets to the heart of why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think, now that you mentioned the education piece, do you think that, and I just talked about this the other day, as a matter of fact, do you think there is a lack of education in boot camps or higher education as far as accessibility goes?
Definitely. I have been fortunate enough to talk to several people who have, you know, are early in their careers and who have gone through boot camps. And consistently, what I hear is either the boot camps or the higher education program did not mention a word about it, or they actively recommended anti-patterns and worst practices, or they brushed right past it and said, and you'll want to learn accessibility because that's important for the job, without actually saying anything about what that means or how to, like, without setting up a framework for learning any of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that really, really sets the tone for what newcomers are going to prioritize. I think anyone in the educator space has a responsibility to guide people in positive directions. Like I don't think every course instructor is going to be an accessibility expert and is going to recommend all the accessibility best practices and make this like a very special episode about accessibility. But I do think it is the responsibility of educators to at least not actively recommend bad practices, right? To at least be mindful of that, and to like call that out and say like, hey, maybe while that's not the focus of this course, here are some resources to learn more, stuff like that. And a lot of times that comes down to very subtle things. There are some streamers I watch, like Jason Langsdorf, who hosts the show Learn with Jason, which you and I are both LWJ alums.
Yep.
One of the things I've noticed is anytime as part of his streams, he puts an image on the page, he immediately fills it with some sort of alt. Now, usually that alt text is not, you know, the most florid, well thought out alt text. It's usually maybe a couple of words, right? Because that's not the focus of the stream, but he still puts it there. He still demonstrates that it deserves to be there, right? And it's like not the worst alt text in the world.
Yeah, and you know, I actually spoke with somebody, what was it, maybe the end of last week, at the beginning of this week. We were talking about, you know, boot camps, and this person actually graduated from one recently and said, well, the only thing they told us about accessibility was you have to have alt text and images, and that was it. And we moved right on. And for that instance, and I've heard of a couple other instances where one boot camp and maybe one institute of higher learning was teaching accessibility, and that was it. There was nothing else.
Mm.
I've not heard very much of that either. So yeah, there's a definitely um, a lot of lacking as far as education for accessibility goes, other than, you and I see what, maybe one or two sites out there that, they offer maybe a little more than one or two, but they offer some sort of accessibility training,
Mhm.
WebAIM, for instance,
Yeah.
or DQ. But other than that, you don't see much.
and and a big part of it is those things are seen as separate programs, right? They
Right.
are detached from core education about what it means to do web development.
Yeah.
When I was helping with the onboarding program at my old role, um this was one of the things of like, we initially started with doing like a quote unquote accessibility week in like part of that kind of informal quasi like internal boot camp that thing that we were doing. And what we ultimately found was uh, the only reason we were doing it as like a segmented off week was because we needed to ensure the availability of the instructors like myself who were knowledgeable about it so that we could like actually pop in and provide guidance. But the takeaway that people were having was that accessibility was its own kind of separate thing, and that um, you know is the responsibility of the person who does the accessibility, and that it was kind of seen as this optional thing. Whereas I think if accessibility is going to get better as an industry, we need to like more like frequently integrate it with just generic web development training, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So I was, coming up on our, when we were to get together, I came across um, some interesting stuff that I wanted to share with you. Um, so I ran into a div that had text that was in a paragraph tag that used a span tag. So you had your div, you had your paragraph, and then you had your span, and then the text. And in the span, there was an inline styling of, no, I'm sorry. In the span, there was an I tag. Okay. that was just for that one word. The rest of it was in regular
Mhm.
text, and then everything else closed. So that kind of made my that kind of made me tear up a little bit when I saw that. And the other instance, which even at my ripe old age of 26, um, I learned that. So I've never come across this, and I'm surprised I never have, to my knowledge, that in a section tag you can have ARIA labeled by, and I just learned that yesterday, or yesterday or the day before, for that matter.
Hmm.
Um, so I just wanted to share those with you. What do you think? And with me, it makes, I have my idea book. When I see stuff like that, I write down, okay, maybe an article, or,
Mhm.
a presentation or something. What do you think when you see stuff like this, either every day or, just whatever? What do you think? And should we, as educators, people that, either, whether it be in a boot camp, whether it be a university, whether it be just, on Twitch for that matter, or a podcast, what do you think we should do as far as getting the word out to people that you know, yeah, React, Vue, Angular, they're great. But HTML and CSS, they're great too, especially when we see people that get discouraged or frustrated at CSS. So how do we bring those people in, I guess is my question, and how do we educate them further?
Yeah, so never underestimate the power of a vibrant story. I think one of the most helpful things sometimes is showing what the actual experience is for end users. Um, it's kind of funny that like we talk about semantic HTML because I think the term semantics sometimes carries with it a bit of dismissiveness outside of web dev spaces, right? Like, oh, it's all just semantics. And I think
Yeah.
some people take that attitude with them when they're thinking about semantic markup, right? We're talking about something that's very academic and philosophical, right? But at the end of the day, like, I just need an element, right?
Yeah.
Like the, a lot of this stuff, the things about uh, good HTML and CSS techniques can sometimes feel very abstract and very academic until you, for instance, pull up a screen reader and you show the measurable differences and you
Yeah.
go, hey, this is the experience that we've got right now. Notice how we're kind of leaving the user to their own devices in this moment, right? We're not being helpful. In fact, we're being actively like counterproductive. Oh, because we removed this element, the user's keyboard focus is now back at the beginning of the page, right? This is inconvenient at nicest, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Showing the actual user experience that results from the work that we do, I think makes that a lot more tangible for folks. It takes it out of the realm of the abstract and the academic into the realm of creating usable user interfaces, which at its heart is the role of a web developer, right? You can be like, my opinion is that when you are hired as a web developer or any interface developer, your job is not slinging around JavaScript. It's not slinging around React or the framework du jour. It's not even slinging around HTML or CSS. Like, your job is creating a user interface that people can use, whatever that means, right? That usability is at the core. Your
Mhm.
job is to make sure that the user can do what it is they need to do, and that is a comfortable experience. And I mean, accessibility falls into that as well, right? And that's why accessibility is your job as well, right? Is because your job is usability. That is what you are in the business of. And everything else, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, framework of the day, those are tools to help you get there. And I think most front end developers I've seen get that to some degree, right?
Mhm.
They might have their favorite camps to fall into, their favorite tools to use. And I'll admit, I love me some 11D and I will defend it till the day I die. I love me my tools too, right?
Yep.
But at the end of the day, I think most front end developers actually really want to have an experience like that folks can use. No one wants to know that folks can't use your experience. And so by showing actionable demos of like, here's how the user experience is for real people, and here's how we could make it better, I think makes it very visceral in a way that I think resonates with folks. And so that was kind of what I was trying to do, for instance, with the DL posts is like,
Right.
this is a pattern that you do a lot, right? But the way that you're structuring this very likely isn't communicating as much information or isn't providing as much ease of use to your users. But here's an element that could make that so much easier for you, right? Here's a thing that could provide a an experience that folks can actually use and use more deftly. Um, and so that I think is kind of the big thing that I would say. Um, it's not about like shaming bad practices there, but about demonstrating, hey, we're all on this like positive trend line, right? That's the goal, is we all want to be on this positive trend line of increasing usability. Here's how we could take some actionable steps to make this more usable for real people.
Right. Yeah, definitely agree with you there. So, we have tons and tons of sites, all, teaching HTML, CSS, JavaScript, on and on and on, that are on the internet. Some are, let's say 3 to 6 months old. Some are, as old as I am, maybe older,
Mhm.
right? How do
26, of
we,
course.
26, of course, yes. How do we, now, my opinionated state, I say, there's a few out there that you probably don't want to refer to. Or if you refer to them, but don't fall into a rabbit hole as far as, you know, the outdated information
Mhm.
on them. Uh, how do we, how do we say to people that are learning, here's where you want to go. Let's just say, for instance, MDN. It's very
Mhm.
popular, of course, Mozilla Developer Network. Uh, Go here, learn your basics there.
Yeah.
Uh, and then here's another list here's to follow. Is there a list that you usually would refer people to, or do you just say, go out there and learn? Because I've done both in the past.
Mhm.
Now I kind of say, definitely Mozilla Developer Network, Free Code Camp for that matter. Um, so, what's
Yeah.
your preference?
I think it depends a lot on who we're talking to, right?
Okay.
Because for like part of me wants to say like, oh, recommend people to like look at the specs, right? But you
Right.
don't recommend the specs to everyone. You shouldn't, because while the specs are good, they're very good. Um, they they're often very inscrutable if you don't have the context of the years of work that led into them and into
Yes.
why they word things the way they do and stuff like that. And that means that you get a whole bunch of jargon and not a whole lot of takeaways, right? So I might point someone to the specs if I know that they've been this isn't their first rodeo. They've been at this for a while and they need to get to the source of truth.
Yeah.
But it's not something I would recommend for everyone. Uh, I do love MDN as a general resource. I think that um, there are very few times where MDN isn't the right place to go. Like it's generally helpful for generally anyone who needs it. So I love MDN. I also have to give a shout out to WebAIM, which we've talked about a bit before. When I was
Yep.
first learning accessibility, I fell down the WebAIM rabbit hole, and I am eternally grateful to that team
Yeah.
because it's just a fantastic resource. Um, I really enjoy the works of Adrian Roselli because one of the things I like is he focuses on user tested examples. Or if he doesn't have direct user testing to back up what he's saying, he will at very least demonstrate what he's seeing with a whole bunch of videos of like screen readers in action. I think that again, kind of going to this whole thing of like sometimes talking about accessibility and semantics can feel very academic and very intangible. I think having something that refers to direct user testing, or at very least can show you what that example is I think a huge asset rather than things learned from things someone else wrote about 3 years ago based on what they read about like 5 years before that. I think focusing on the real examples, the real validation can be a huge help there. So I would recommend resources like Adrian Roselli. I also think just in general um, is good to if you have an inkling that a problem you're trying to solve might have some accessibility considerations, just straight up googling like accessible modal, accessible carousel, whatever. Accessible carousel is not going to return a whole lot for you that's actionable because that is a fundamentally hard problem. There's two hard problems in computer science. There's P equals NP and there's accessible carousels.
Yeah.
And the third is array out of bounds exceptions. Um, and the So just simply Googling what it is you're looking for and seeing if you can find things that directly tackle the specific experience you're trying to address. Um, and so this time, I also want to shout out the ARIA authoring practices. I think it's worth mentioning that, um, you know, the ARIA authoring practices are like they adhere to what is theoretically correct in many ways and aren't always incredibly user tested. But they're kind of the like best approaches of the people who put together the specs. And I think they really demonstrate like here's kind of the expected behavior for a lot of like accessible experiences. And maybe you're not going to implement it exactly for this word for word, but it can give you a sense of like what is expected from this experience. So those are a few places I find myself referring people to a whole lot. And if you're not finding those resources, that's a call to action to write about it, because some of my blog posts were things that I felt like there should be blog posts on, and some people had written similar blog posts, and I just wasn't satisfied with their explanation. It didn't
Yep.
they didn't focus on the same things I focus on, or they didn't
Right.
use the same applicable examples I wanted seen. And when I was responsible for sharing resources with, you know, newcomers to the industry, like I wanted those resources to focus on the things I cared about, you know. So writing those blog posts based on um, what it is you're actually trying to get across, what that fundamental message actually is. If you find a void there, if you're not finding blog posts that are satisfying the needs that you have, write it.
Yeah. So a few things that I want to mention after you just spoke. One, we're developers, we Google a lot. So,
Yes.
you know, I don't use Google, but I do use a search engine. I use DuckDuckGo. But still, I use that search engine feature a lot still.
Mhm.
Um, the specs are very technical,
Mhm.
and I tell people, especially with accessibility, and I can imagine um, other areas would be, you know, a little bit more, maybe equally harder, that they're very technical. It's
Mhm.
basically a technical manual that you're reading, like WCAG, for instance. It's a
Yeah.
technical manual.
Mm.
Hopefully, that we're the work that I'm doing with other, you know, awesome people in the W3C, that's going to be a lot easier for people just starting out to do with WCAG 3.0, but that's that's a ways
Yeah.
down the line.
And it's
Um,
worth calling out. I don't mean to like diss the specs, right? It's just
right.
they're for a different audience and for different reasons. They are not
Yes.
meant to be your introduction into this world.
Right. 100% agree. 100% agree with you there. Um, and, you know, there are other ways to, you know, learn, and you get to that point where you finally go, okay, I'm ready. It was the same with me.
Mhm.
I'm ready to dip my toes into the CSS specs
Yeah.
or WCAG. So yeah, yeah, that is, you know, it's, well, it goes back to learning,
Mhm.
and you know, we're always learning.
Yeah.
Um, and I love to learn, you know, learn the new thing the other day, and you know, I had a good laugh about it because I never come across it. Let's switch over to your Twitch stream, because
Yeah.
I've popped in a few times. It's been a while since I've popped in, but I promise I will hopefully get to another stream at some point. Um, tell the listeners a little bit about your stream, because I want to get that out there. And you know, you do a phenomenal job, first of all, with the
Mhm.
stream and the people that you have on, and the learning that, you know,
Mhm.
everybody in the chat and everybody does. So tell us a little bit more about your Twitch stream.
Yeah. So, first of all, I think anyone who does anything in education knows the challenges of finding the right medium for what you want to talk about. One of the reasons I don't write a whole lot of blog posts, especially these days, is because sometimes the ideas I want to talk about are not good fits for blog posts. There
Mhm.
was a blog post that bounced around in my head for months, and I eventually burnt out on it. So please, someone else write this. But it was about um, some of the just like some of my beliefs around focus management in frameworks such as React. I don't know that we always follow best practices in focus management.
Mhm.
And so I had this like blog post I was wanting to write. I couldn't actually do it as a blog post because it was like my fundamental thesis was that, you know, as your application scales, this particular approach to focus management would not scale with it. And that is a problem that only comes from complexity. And blog posts are not great at onboarding you into an already complex situation to convince you that this other way would be simpler. Like there's just a mismatch there. So picking your medium, picking your format is incredibly important. And I've been incredibly encouraged by Twitch as a medium lately, just because it provides a different experience than um, blog posts, for instance, which is that you have a bunch of people attending, like watching in real time, live, participating in the chat. Twitch is such a participatory experience. You are actively encouraged to just play around in the chat box, have fun, say things to the streamer. This is actively encouraged in a way that, I don't see in other in accessibility education, right? Or any other like education for that matter. That kind of interaction of being able to say something to uh, the streamer and have them reply back in just a few minutes or something and give you an answer. There is such a live, vibrant community there, real time interaction, and also um, a community forms around it in a way. So Twitch, for those of you who aren't Twitch viewers, one of the coolest Twitch features in my book is this feature called rating, which is when the streamer is done rating, they choose to automatically send their send their audience to another streamer who is live. And so there's this community of people who just kind of go on this daisy chain of stream to stream. There's all this like kind of interplay. And so this isn't me putting solitary videos out into the world and someone can find my channel, but rather you know some big streamer might send their folks my way, and then I'm going to send those folks to someone else. There's this really vibrant medium, and that I think kind of gets to the heart of like why my show Some Antics is the way that it is. It is I would call it an interview slash live demo format,
Mhm.
where each week I bring on a guest from around web development, and they teach me something. And they do so in a predominantly hands on way. Like we hop into the editor, we make some changes, or we're pulling up the docs. It is a live demo, it's not a scripted, pre-recorded thing, but it's something that's subject to change based on questions that I have or questions that the chat has, in this fundamentally real-time interactive way. Um, and I think that's really cool. I
Yeah.
think that that is such a powerful way to get um, accessible messaging out in front of a bunch of different people and have them propose genuine questions. Whereas if I were to put video tutorials on YouTube, those are great, but you kind of have to go looking for them, right? You kind
Yeah.
of have to go looking for a video about like how do I build an accessible modal, as opposed to this kind of vibrant, real time, in the moment community that Twitch supports. So if any of this seems interesting to you, you should check out the show Semantics. It's every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Central Time, which is 12 p.m. Pacific Time, at twitch.tv/someanticsdev. I know that that link is going to be in the show notes. Um, but it's so fun, and I get to have just wonderful people on. I don't think I could have kept up with the show as long as I had without just all the different guests, because I would have rapidly just exhausted the depths of my understanding of like accessibility and the things I feel are interesting to talk about. It's so much more engaging for me personally to bring in someone such as yourself, Todd, or any of the other just many wonderful people I've had the chance to bring on. Just to get to meet them, get to know them a bit, get to chat with them and have fun and goof off a bit live, and get to learn from them.
Yeah.
Just and their experience. By the way, if you were listening to this show, chances are really good you were the target audience for semantics. This is something that would excite you, and chances are also really good. You know something that I don't about this field, and you might be a good fit for hopping on the show. So please, uh, if you think you've got something that you would like to have me do in this live demo format, please reach out, twitter.com/Ben D. Myers. Please reach out because I'm always looking for a diversity of people to bring on and to share their experience and just create fun stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely recommend it. And yeah, everything will be in the show notes. Highly recommend people reach out to you and you know, like you said, that diversity of guests. Um it's very I mean, I haven't got in as much as I want to the stream, but when I have, you've had always had, you know, a very diverse group of guests, and it's always been fun. And you know,
Mhm.
pop in and put up a lobster emoji in the chat. So yeah, definitely recommend it. So I'm gonna get into the three questions we have as we come down on our time today.
Mhm.
And these are the three questions I ask everybody that comes on the podcast. And I call it the hot seat. So you're on the hot seat now. Are you ready?
We'll see. I mean,
Okay.
we'll see how well I'm able to improvise this. It's not like I have a show that's basically weekly improv about web dev stuff. So we'll see how well this goes.
All right. Sounds good. So the first question is, what about the web these days excites you and keeps you excited in what you do?
Man, it's huge. And there's constantly new ways to build great user experiences for people. One of the things that with my new role, I've been learning more and more about is localization, for instance. That is not something I'd had the chance to work with. And just realizing that that was a thing that I could spend some time learning and getting better at was like it unlocked so much for me,
Yeah.
right? And it's not that the web has a couple of things like that, like, oh, there's accessibility and there's localization and there's performance. The web has so many of those things. It's just a labyrinth that you could get lost in, a forest of things to learn, right? And just things to learn to build great user experiences for people. There's just something very, very exciting about knowing that at the end of the day, someone is going to be using what I've built and it could help them do something really important, right? I could make their world so much easier. Um, it's just, it's fun. And I really, really enjoy that stuff.
Okay. Awesome. I like that answer because yeah, I've never thought of that way. And yeah, yeah. Matter of fact, just as a little sidebar, that kind of that was kind of, you know, I was found out about localization. I also found out about internationalization, and it got me, you know, it got me wanting to learn. So yeah, that's a great answer. Second question is, if there were one thing you could change about the web that we know today, what would that be?
Man, more I don't know if I would change the web itself so much as I would change the web dev community, but I would really love more of a focus on those kind of on using the platform, on understanding what it is the platform actually provides for us and celebrating uh maybe it's just my corner of the of Twitter these days, of web dev Twitter. But I'm really encouraged by seeing folks celebrate when new features land in browsers. Like just the absolute just excitement that occurred when accent color landed in Chrome and Firefox.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
just stuff like that. And I wish there were, I wish we as an industry were more excited about those fundamentals and about just kind of the robustness of the core web technologies and about teaching folks about that and about empathy, right? Like I said, with our role as web developers, our role as front end developers is building usable experiences for real people first and foremost. Like I I wish we could put more emphasis on that as an industry rather than, here's the latest, greatest, up to datest technology that you're going to forget about in a few years' time.
Right.
That the usability, I think, is something I wish I saw more celebration of in the industry.
Yeah, definitely. So the last question I have is your favorite part of front end development or design or anything else that you really like the most, or that you nerd out over.
It's the easy answer is accessibility. I think
Yeah.
accessibility is, in my book, the perfect confluence of the things I love most about web development. I think that someone who is very proficient in web accessibility is someone who is very proficient in just about anything that could be asked about a front end developer, whether that's, uh, being well versed in the core web technologies and the fundamentals, or being well versed in user experience and design, or being well versed in being a tester, a robust tester, quality assurance. Just about anything you can ask of a front end developer is going to be incorporated some way in accessibility. And so it's a lot of those, just a lot of those responsibilities, I think, really shine in accessibility. Accessibility is, for me, kind of the pinnacle of web development there. And just knowing that it like makes a difference for folks who, you know, unfortunately, and I hate to say it, like, unfortunately, we don't always consider disabled people in building environments for like just people in general, right?
Yep.
And being able to build user experiences with them in mind is huge, I think. So that's something I nerd out about the most is accessibility. I don't think that comes as a surprise to anyone who's been listening for the past hour.
No, not at all. All right. Well, that's great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. So I'd like to close out the podcast with my guests letting the listeners know what they currently have going on, and where people can find you. So I'm going to give you the floor, and I'm going to let you let everybody know what you got going on and where they can find you.
Awesome. So the best place to find me and the things I'm working on is on Twitter. I'm at Ben D Myers. That's Myers. And the D is D as in dog there. So BEND as in dog, MYERS. That's the best place to find what I'm working on. The main thing I'm working on right now is the stream, which you can find at twitch.tv/some antics dev. That is, it's because it's a pun that I'm saying out loud. I will go ahead and spell it. It's SOMEANTICSDEV. But it sounds like semantics as in semantic markup. I'm a pun driven developer, but it does make it very hard to talk about what it is I do on stream. So that is kind of the big thing that I've been working on there is that stream. That's live every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Central. You can go to that Twitch channel and you can follow so that you get notified. And I'm just super excited for the year ahead, looking to step up the stream in a few ways. And I really hope y'all will join me there. Those are kind of the best places to find me and what I'm working on right now. So yeah, I think that's where you should go looking.
Awesome. And definitely I recommend going to the Twitch stream and watching, you and your guests, talk about what you're talking about for the day and what you do on there. One of the Twitch streams that I highly recommend to people. And we will have that in the show notes for people to have available to them. And I'm going to push them to get there. So, Ben, thank you very much for coming on today and sharing a part of your day with me and the listeners. I appreciate it very much. I've been wanting to get you on after you had me on your stream and talk a little accessibility, and here we are finally. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on, Todd. This has been a blast, and I always enjoy getting to chat with you.
Likewise as well. Thank you. So, with that, I want to thank you, listeners, for tuning into the Front End Nerdery podcast. I'll be back next time with a new guest, new conversation about front end design, development, and other topics as well. If you would please rate this podcast on your podcast device of choice, like, subscribe, and watch on the Front End Nerdery YouTube channel. Links to transcripts and show notes are there because this podcast is accessible. I'm Todd Libby, and this has been the Front End Nerdery podcast. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.